Well, howdy, folks, and welcome back to the farm. Welcome back to the long-awaited and long-overdue follow-up to Sorority Security Guard Volume 1. Now, to prepare for my continuation of the story, I went back and I listened to Volume 1, and I realized that I hadn't gotten very far at all. I hadn't even gotten myself hired as a security guard yet. After my re-listening to Volume 1, I realized that I kinda just threw shade at my roommates for an hour. Hopefully this episode will be more interesting. What did they throw in the pool? Okay, let's go ahead and get that cleared up. Sorry for all the delay on that. So, it was a pig. It was a pig carcass. A dead pig that some small group of young men from a particular fraternity climbed over the fence of one particular sorority that was a bit of a distance from campus. I could see why they would be bold about pulling this kind of stunt because there are ways to approach the backyard of this house without being seen by a lot of people, especially in the 90s. And apparently, their plan was to throw the pig carcass into the pool at the beginning of Thanksgiving break. And so when the house opened up again after the holiday, they would have this disgusting raw pig soup in their pool. Now, there were a couple of problems that derailed their planned outcome. It was not just a dead pig that they found somewhere or killed while hunting. They had purchased a full carcass from a butcher, apparently. So the pig had been properly eviscerated. So that caused a problem because it was not going to decompose nearly as aggressively as I imagine they were hoping. Also, the cold weather over the break didn't help. Cold water generally is not the most conducive to decomposition. Then there was, of course, the chlorine in the pool. And with all those factors combined, it was just a gross thing they found in the pool. It didn't sort of ruin their pool and require some sort of extensive cleaning. If I recall, of course, they drained it and cleaned it before returning it to service. So to sum up, it was a group of frat guys, and the animal didn't drown in the pool. It was butchered at some meatpacking plant. And it required a draining and cleaning of the pool, but it wasn't nearly as gross or extensive as they were hoping. Now, why would they do this? The rumor that I heard was that one of the girls who lived in that sorority house had cheated on or otherwise offended one of her boyfriends or friends with benefits or just some guy she was dating. But anyway, so in revenge, these guys thought that they would ruin the pool for an entire sorority, and that would show her. That would make her loyal and rethink her terrible actions. I guess that was their plan. But, I think if they were being honest with themselves, they would just admit that they were enraged by some token of disrespect, and they just wanted to lash out. And I guess I should be happy that no animals were actually killed or drowned during the incident of rage, and I should also be glad that no one was injured, I suppose. And no sort of permanent property damage, like in some of the other cases we'll discuss later on in this episode. And I'll keep soldiering on in this episode, even though you guys maybe can tell that I have a bit of a cold, and I wish I could say that it was from working so hard on my rap song that I wore my voice out. But that's not it. I think I just picked something up from the variety of in-laws and young people and school teachers that were in my house last week and slightly before that for Christmas. And so this means that I'm going to delay the rap song until Volume 3. However, Volume 3 will come out 1 week from today, so I'm committed to go ahead and finish up this story because there are some weird details that people will have to keep in mind from one volume to another, and I don't want to have to keep recapping things because eventually people will figure out, wow, this is kind of boring. This is just kind of one little event happening after another, some of which trigger some sense of nostalgia or humor. But in general, it was just some young guy trying to earn extra money, and it turns out that I learned a lot about the world that was more valuable than the actual little bit of money that I got. But there will be plenty of music in this episode, including a song. Unfortunately, not one that I sing. You wouldn't want to hear that this week. It would be even worse than my normal singing, which you guys will eventually hear. And I promise in the next episode you will hear me rapping. I actually have already recorded a sort of mock-up or demo. Of course, it's me rapping with a cold, and so it's just uniquely, stunningly bad. But it does prove that my lyrics fit the music, and I've pretty much got it worked out. The chorus is going to be especially tricky. Let's go ahead and listen to one rendition of the theme song that Murica trotted out for me after uploading some different tunes as a basis. Bear in mind that I wrote all these lyrics. They're very personal for me. I wouldn't let the AI intrude on my memories like this. So the song talks about my experience as a sorority security guard from my point of view, and hopefully everybody can get a sense of the emotions I had and how I viewed myself. So let's take a listen. Murica came up with 2 good versions of this, and this will be the first one. We'll play the other one later. But here it is, and I think I'm going to call it, I'm the Hero They Need. Or maybe Clip-On Tie. That's a good title, I think. Clip-On Tie. So let's take a listen to Clip-On Tie.
Welcome back to the farm. We talking sorority girls, how to keep them from harm. They're like prisons where the new girls cry at night when the air gets dank and drunks start to fight. I know I don't sound like much of a god, but in Texas that license test ain't too hard. Dusty concrete. I got 40 acres, but now I'm the mule. Looking for fame and fortune with no retreat. Dancing with danger on these Texas streets. I know I don't sound like much of a god, but in Texas, that license test ain't too hard. But I gotta maintain, 'cause I'm the
So to go back and recap things a little bit, recall that I started UT in the fall of 1995. And my first 2 years of tuition were fully paid for by an academic scholarship that I got my senior year of high school. Wrote a couple of essays. It was a local foundation, and they were interested in helping launch people who showed academic promise. I'm not sure what they would think of what eventually happened to me and what I decided to do with my life, but there's that. So the fall of 95 through the spring of 96 was paid for. Fall of 96 through spring of 97 was paid for. So starting in the spring of 97, I needed to start looking for how I was going to cover the rest of the money. Student debt wasn't such a big issue. There weren't a lot of people around as adults struggling to pay off student debts at the time. And so it wasn't really in the consciousness, but just basic prudence would say that you want to try to graduate with as little debt as possible. And so there were options. There was always the option of dipping back into the scholarship pool. And, this time maybe I could pull out all the stops and start marking down that I have native ancestry. And, maybe that would unlock all that magic Native American money. And it would rain down on me, and I would open my own casino, and it would be awesome. But it turns out there apparently isn't a big pool of money just sitting there waiting for people who are part Native American to just, dip into. And then there were Pell Grants. They were short bursts of money that you could get if you showed financial need and you were enrolled. I got a couple of those. I started to make enough money with my side activities that I could no longer qualify for Pell Grants. But I was making the mark. I was surviving. Luckily, this was the late 1990s, and even though the internet hadn't hit the streets yet, people weren't making money from any .com stuff yet, but there was definitely energy in the air related to the internet, and the ability to just organize people through email was just so cool. It was so much faster than paper. And when you enrolled at UT, you got your own UT email address. I had never had an email address before. So the economic slowdown and malaise of the very early 90s were gone. And I can tell you, money was falling off the trees. I was very fortunate to be a young person during that time. I will say that being male required me to be a little bit more creative. People like to make judgments about what people do when they're young for money, especially when they're older, when they're my age. So I'll say it right now. If I were a female version of my younger self, I probably would have done some spicy dancing. As we all know, I have a pathological lack of social anxiety. I don't get stage fright, so I think it would be a perfect job. I'm not a very good dancer, so the artistic quality of my quote-unquote dancing wouldn't be at the highest level. But I'd get the job done. I'm a workhorse. As we've said before, I'm a people pleaser. A popcorn movie.
Just like our dear leader.
So funny. So funny.
And so If I'm not going to do spicy dancing, then what kind of jobs were available? Well, it was an exuberant time. Communism was over, apparently. The Soviet Union was a decaying heap, relegated to the ash pile of history. The Cold War was over. We would never have to worry about Russia or problems in Eastern Europe again, luckily. And capitalism would rule supreme forever. There would be endless expansion. Our population would explode. Everybody's having 3 and 4 kids. And places like Chicago and Detroit would become these shining, gleaming megacities full of financial activity and wealth, with a negative 225% unemployment rate, meaning everybody's got at least 2 jobs because there's just so much work for everybody. At the time, we thought that by, say, 2025, we would have to write down salaries using scientific notation. For example, how much did you make last year? Oh, 2.35 times 10 to the 9th. Or 6.827 times 10 to the 14th. That would be my net worth. Or maybe just my income for a month, if it were a good month. But that's how we thought at the time. Everything was going to be awesome forever. The internet was going to save the world. The information superhighway would bring people together. It would be revolutionary for media and politics. Everybody would get a say. Everybody would have the right information. It would be a utopia. So what real jobs were there, other than spicy dancing? Well, you could do tutoring for certain organizations if you could pass a competency test and a background check, stuff like that. There was office work, administrative work you could do in campus offices or even for state agencies who needed to process a whole bunch of applications of some kind, things like that. Then you could move furniture. People bought stuff back then. You could hand out flyers, because once again, there was a chance back then that somebody might see something on the flyer they wanted to buy or something they wanted to participate in. But now, everybody's too tired. They don't have enough time or extra money. Or they just are shut-ins who never really want to leave the house. So that's not something you see much anymore. Then there was retail work, because Amazon wasn't a thing. If you needed shoes or a book, you had to leave the house. So working at Barnes & Noble was a good destination for a 20-year-old. Also working at, say, Foley's or Macy's, folding shirts. That wasn't a terrible fate, so those were all considered. And, of course, getting a job back then was really just a matter of looking through the back of newspapers. And the Austin Chronicle was a good resource. And also the Daily Texan, the student newspaper, had a good classifieds section. I did just what you always see in the movies. I took a red pen and circled the jobs that seemed interesting. Then you call, find out more details about how to apply. It was almost always going there and filling out some kind of paperwork and talking to somebody. everything was face-to-face. So, of course, that gave someone like me an advantage because I have a firm handshake. Even at 20 years old, once again, no social anxiety. So, getting out there and shaking hands and talking to strangers was not a problem for me. But we're talking about Vincent here. This is me, the guy that you know and love, despite certain qualities. And if you know me, you know that this wasn't going to be a simple thing. I couldn't just get a normal job and make a little bit of money like a normal person. So, there were a couple of classified ads that caught my eye. They stood out from the others. And one of them was working for this place on the drag on Guadalupe, right across the street from campus. So it was just a short walk from my dorm. And it was this place called the Church of Scientology. So at this point, I had decided that I was going to apply to Zimco, but Zimco required an in-person interview, and the office was way up north, off campus, at some weird office park, and so it was going to take some extra doing for me to get up there. But my thought was, I had heard that Zimco guarded properties on West Campus, which couldn't be that hard. It's not like trying to guard 6th Street. I thought, some frat party problems, some noise complaints, some car break-ins, and that should be about it. And the Church of Scientology was right on the way to West Campus. I would have to actually walk right past it to get to the properties where I would work for Zimco. So I thought, if I get a job at the church, then I could easily try to work both jobs. The job seemed to involve basically just greeting people when they came into the church, and the church was basically just a bookstore, and I thought that would be easy. I had already read a lot of Dianetics, which is the main book of Scientology. It's the book they start you out with, and it has a lot of the basic definitions. There is nothing in there about the mighty Lord Xenu. You don't get that yet. Hearing this, you might think two things. Number one, you might think, well, Vincent, didn't you know at the time that there were a lot of concerns and stories about Scientology and how it might be a very aggressive, mind-controlling cult? I had heard the rumors that it was a cult, and that it had a very rigid, top-down hierarchy, and there was a lot of discipline, and they even had their own prisons where people could be kept for years for ecclesiastical infractions. Well, when I heard this, I thought to myself, sounds great. Anyone who knows me knows that mind-altering cults that require absolute submission are my bread and butter. I got no problem with that. The only question was, how much money do you make? Now, the second thing that you might be thinking is, what does this have to do with Zimco? I mean, sure, it's interesting that you applied for the Church of Scientology before applying to be a security guard, but isn't this Sorority Security Guard Volume 2? Shouldn't we move on to the job interview with Zimco? Don't you want to meet Ron? Well, this actually does have a lot to do with the rest of the story. The Church of Scientology is going to come back repeatedly, and it's going to play a major part in the ending of Zimco. So, just bear with me. This is not just a regular Church of Scientology. Think of this as Chekhov's Church of Scientology. I wouldn't put it in the story if it doesn't come back to pay off. And so, yes, it does come back repeatedly and with dramatic and hopefully humorous effects. Because bear in mind, it turns out I wasn't the only potential Zimco guard who had that idea. That, I could sell books for Scientology, and then I could guard properties in West Campus for Ron overnight. That might work out to be a nice chunk of change for me. So I had that bright idea. And on the day of my interview, I put on my best polo shirt and my best 1990s dad jeans. You know, the kind that were acid washed and had a waistline that was way too high. And I went there, and they greeted me nicely once I said, hey, I'm not here for auditing, I'm here to fill out an application. And so they gave me a clipboard and a pen and a stack of 2 or 3 sheets of paper, and they had me sit down in a waiting area. If you picture this place, it's a normal sort of bookstore type vibe. Glass front. You can see what's going on inside, and when you walk in, there are big displays, including that big cardboard stand-up display with a big exploding volcano. And that was to promote Dianetics, of course. And there were big stacks of L. Ron Hubbard books everywhere. The application, if I recall, didn't have any bizarre questions on it. There may have been a question about my psychiatric state that I thought was a little extreme. They were asking if I had ever received any psychiatric treatment or was I on any psychotropic drugs of any kind. And of course, other than tons of caffeine and occasional alcohol, I was just fine. So I went up to the front area and I gave the clipboard back to the person. And they said thank you and invited me to have a seat and someone would be with me shortly. And I sat down, and a few minutes later, these 2 people come out from a back room, and one of them says,
Well, hello, Mr. LeCornu. Would you follow us, please?
Let's go back to the back and talk a little bit.
I thought, sure. I figured, okay, well, they've got an office in the back. That makes sense. And that's where the big boss is, and I'll talk to them for a little bit, and I'll charm them, and I'll get the job. So I said sure, and I followed them through that back door they just emerged from. But the doors led to this dim, dark hallway. And they started walking down the hallway, and I started following them, and it was getting sort of darker and more claustrophobic. And I was very eagerly searching for that beam of light that would be coming from the big boss's office at the end of this dark hallway to justify why we were walking down there. But all I could see were these strangely formal-looking wooden double doors. And while the front of the building didn't look like a church, it looked like a Barnes & Noble. These doors looked a lot like the doors to a church. Now, I had just seen Pulp Fiction, along with everyone else in the world, just a few years before. And I think we can all agree that one thing we all learned from that movie is that dim hallways and back rooms and strangers don't mix. And it can be alarming for cool people who just happen to need some money. So we get to the end of the hallway. We get to those double doors. And they both give me a big smile, and they open the doors. And it was just a dark room. And I couldn't see what was in there. And so here I was. I've got a choice to make. Do I go into this dark room? Do I even stop to ask, what are we doing? What's going on here? Well, 20-year-old Vincent did exactly what you might expect him to do. He just walked right into the room. So why did I do that? Let's make two things clear. Number one, I think I did make it clear earlier that I needed money. I was looking for money, and who knows? It was a very dark room. Maybe somebody dropped some money. Maybe if I checked the corners, I might find some cash. And number two, 20-year-old Vincent was pretty sure of himself. Back then, I don't recall, but I may have brought a knife. I always carried a knife with me a lot, even after college. I think it's just a rural thing. But I thought to myself, they probably don't even have knives. Unless they've got 6 more people in this dark room. I'm pretty sure I could take them out. I mean, they work at a bookstore. It does not take that much torque to break someone's neck. So, I go inside, and as my eyes adjust, I can see that it's a little private theater. It's like a little miniature movie theater. And they told me that I needed to watch a movie before we could go any further. And I didn't ask them how long it would be because I figured, well, it's got to be just a few minutes long. It couldn't be more than 10 minutes long. Plus, they had these nice, comfortable leather seats. And in 1997, there weren't a lot of fancy or very comfortable theater chairs. So I'm thinking, I like their style. And as they close the door, and the movie starts, I start to think to myself, this isn't so bad. I'll sit here for 10 minutes max. Then I'll finally get to talk to them. I'll charm them, and I'll get the job. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the courtesy that I did not receive from my interviewers, and let you know right now, this movie wasn't 5 minutes long. It wasn't 10 minutes long. It wasn't 20 minutes long. It wasn't 40 minutes long. It was 45 minutes. And I actually found on YouTube a kind of unofficial leaked version of this movie that someone recorded apparently in the 2010s using their cell phone. They didn't have to worry about me recording anything with my cell phone in 1997. But I checked, and yes, it's 45 minutes long. And it was kind of cool to recall the stuff that I saw. It's a very peculiar film. There was no doubt that it was the same one. Once you've seen it, you're not gonna mistake it for anything else. So, unfortunately, guys, we're going to have to talk just a little bit about what was in the movie, because you probably would never have suspected this, but understanding Scientology is going to be critical to understanding my experience as a sorority security guard on West Campus. Life is strange. It presents unusual intersections to you, and it's up to you how you deal with those. So, how did the movie start? Well, the first thing you see is an asteroid field in space, kind of like from that scene in The Empire Strikes Back. And you hear a very proper, middle-aged male announcer say, "Welcome to a Scientology information film." And eventually, as you pass through this treacherous asteroid field, you eventually reach the planet Earth, and you're taken on a virtual tour across the Earth, being shown various photos of real estate that the church is particularly proud of. For example, their founding church in Washington, D.C., or their International Ecclesiastic Management Center in Florida. As we zoom back out to the globe and it begins to spin, you can see that all the little locations in the world where the Dianetics book is being sold are represented as little points of light on a dark world. These little churches of Scientology all over the world are bursting with hope and enlightenment. Then they actually did get into a little bit of what Scientology means and what Scientologists believe. They talk about how scientific materialism has not proven that gods or spirits don't exist. That's true. They talk about how religion is extremely old and materialism is new. That's also true. They talk about the failures of materialism and how people are still searching for particular answers for their lives, and they don't seem to be getting significantly happier. And they're right about that too. So, they're 3-0. Good job. Then they ask, is Scientology a religion? Well, then they pelt you with quotes from 65 court cases from across the United States, but also in Canada and in Europe. And all of these quotes are from judges talking about their decision and why they have affirmed that Scientology is indeed a religion, and it should be tax exempt. So they move on from these court cases to talk about how L. Ron Hubbard has never claimed to be a god. He has always claimed to just be a particularly wise and capable man, just like the Buddha himself. They added that, not me. Then they talk about what's the difference between Dianetics and Scientology. They talk about how Dianetics is part of Scientology, and that Dianetics studies specifically, and I quote, what the soul is doing to the body, end quote. And then Scientology covers the broader umbrella of, quote, the study and handling of the spirit in relation to itself, universes, and other life. Then we take a tour of the L. Ron Hubbard Museum. We see walls that are papered over with the covers of magazines that he was once published in. He wrote a lot of short stories, if you're wondering, in all sorts of genres, mysteries. But of course, he loved science fiction the most. And then they talked about another thing that I was raising my eyebrows about, but later I found out to be absolutely true once again. In this movie, they talk about how the CIA attacked L. Ron Hubbard, and how the success of Dianetics unfortunately caught the attention of the intelligence community because they didn't like how Dianetics could be used so effectively to counteract mind control tactics. In other words, the MK Ultra program did not appreciate Dianetics because it was almost a user's manual for the mind, especially for a mind that is under a great deal of stress or under attack, or something is attempting to control that mind. And so at the time, I blew this stuff off, but now I know it's actually true. Then this smartly dressed woman gives us a tour of an ideal Scientology bookstore. And what do you know, it's laid out a lot like the bookstore I just came out of to come back into this creepy room. Then they move on to talk about the orgs. O-R-G-S. The orgs. Now, these are the actual institutions that make up what we call Scientology. Scientology is actually composed of legally separate institutions. They have different geographic locations, different ecclesiastical jurisdictions. And among these orgs, the Sea Org is the most prestigious. And that's Sea as in Ocean Org, S-E-A-O-R-G, the Sea Org. People in the Sea Org are mostly at sea, hence the name. They spend their lives in international waters where a lot of laws can no longer be enforced, and these people put in 100-hour work weeks. Some people claim to have been stuck on these ships for years, but that's no biggie, because when you sign up for the Sea Org, you have to sign a billion-year contract. You have to sign a billion-year contract because in Scientology, reincarnation is a very real thing, and you can make commitments for what your soul is going to do in the next body. That sounds a little shaky to me. I don't know that a judge would uphold a contract that someone claims that your soul signed in a previous life. But such a contract apparently would be enforceable inside the ecclesiastical judicial domain of Scientology itself. Now, even though L. Ron Hubbard died, each organization, on all of their properties, they still maintain an office, a special office that no one can use except L. Ron Hubbard. Even though L. Ron Hubbard died, I believe, in the 1980s. And so these empty offices are called the Office for Ron. And so every org facility has an Office for Ron that they maintain. They keep it ready as though the L. Ron was going to walk back into the office at any time now to resume his work. They say that they maintain these offices for Ron as a symbol that they will seek to stay, quote, on source, end quote, which is a Scientology term that means true to the writing and the ideals of L. Ron Hubbard. And while these people are talking in the movie, you can see some images in the background and some signage in this ideal bookstore. One of these big signs is a cardboard display of a schematic drawing of a bridge, and the title of the diagram is The Bridge to Total Freedom. And apparently this is what Scientology is trying to offer to mankind. And I find out that these bookstores, as I've been calling them, are not just mere bookstores. They are religious technology centers. So I was in a full-blown Center for Religious Technology. I was beginning to wonder whether they were right. Maybe mankind has never had a better friend than L. Ron Hubbard. They also had the nerve to actually mention indirectly, their secret prisons. They mention these institutions that are available for the, quote, ecclesiastical redress of wrongs, end quote. And they mention that, quote, civil authority cannot interfere in church disputes, end quote. So if you have a problem in Scientology, bear in mind there is a Scientology justice system available to you to help you resolve it. The penultimate part of the movie explained auditing. Now, they do definitely talk about financial audits, the kind of auditing that the IRS does, because they are very proud of their decade-long IRS audit, which did conclude that they were a bona fide religion and should remain tax-exempt. So they definitely talk about that. But then they talk about what they call auditing. And this was explained by a well-dressed professorial man who called himself the Director of Processing. And this Director of Processing showed us graphs and numbers that prove that auditing increases IQ and remediates personality problems. Now, he didn't explain exactly how these graphs actually show this, but they were very impressive graphs. The lines started really low on the left side, but then, as you move to the right, they suddenly started going up. Way up. And there was like this peak all the way on the right, where the line goes all the way up to the top right corner. You can't argue with that. That's just science. So, the Director of Processing tells us, quote, this shows what happens when you address the spirit and not just the brain. And he goes on to say that psychology is injuring man's future, partly because they focus on, quote, drugging and punishing people, end quote. Now, anytime someone has some complaints about modern psychology, I will generally agree. But what this Director of Processing did not mention, the little factoid that he kept to himself, is that the Church of Scientology records all of this auditing. And, of course, part of the auditing process is getting into super personal stuff, and you're being asked about your feelings, about all kinds of stuff in your past, especially your sexuality or any criminal activity you've committed. And they keep very clear audio recordings of everything you say when you're auditing. And of course, if you're a celebrity of some kind, they are even more careful about keeping the recordings. And apparently, people high up in the church were well aware of some of the sensitive things that some of the celebrities that are prominent in the church have admitted to during their auditing. And we'll hear about some of those celebrities in a little bit. So in the last part of the movie, we get like 24 testimonials, a few sentences each, but it adds up. And we have people from all walks of life, people of every age, and we've got everybody from jazz musicians to chiropractors to plumbers to dentists to race car drivers to Kirstie Alley to John Travolta. I was a little disappointed that I didn't see Tom Cruise anywhere, but trust me, he's in some other leaked videos, and maybe we'll talk about that someday. Maybe I'll recreate that with AI, and I'll play the role of Tom Cruise. They end all these testimonials with this pretty cool slogan. They say, "Scientology makes work fun!" Exclamation point. And then, of course, I can hear the music starting to rise in the background. And that tells me that I'm about to hear a call to action. And so this voice, the narrator, the well-dressed man, the well-dressed middle-aged man, steps into the light, and he says, "A genius rises, and man takes another new step into a new life." Now, of course, when he said that, I thought, is he talking about me? Oh, wait, no, they're talking about L. Ron Hubbard. So the guy continues, "We can rise above the decay, the final flash that will extinguish this planet. You are an immortal being. You are at the threshold of your next trillion years. Where will you spend it? Shivering in agonizing darkness? Or triumphant in the light? The choice is yours, not ours. You slam the door shut in your own face. You don't have to believe us, or even trust us. You could leave this room and go back out into the world and never think or talk about Scientology again. It would be stupid, but you can do it. You can also jump off a bridge or blow your brains out." And so you guys may have started feeling exactly what I was feeling at the time. Just kind of annoyed because, I'm willing to listen to you guys and read your books and work for you. But you can't just expect me to watch a couple of people talking in some instructional video, and then I come out and I'm like, yeah, where's that billion-year contract? I mean, seriously? So the projector stops, the lights go up, those double doors open, and the two faces are there again, and they ask me, "So, what did you think?" And I answered in typical 20-year-old Vincent style. I asked, "You don't actually have to believe any of this stuff to work here, do you?" Their faces changed. They didn't even answer me. They just escorted me out, and they told me that I'd be hearing from them, but I never did. And so, thus ends the life that could have been with the Church of Scientology, rejected for my apostasy and my disbelief. Again, an outcast infidel. Now, I want to remind people again that it turns out there were two other young men who ended up working for Zimco, but who apparently did believe what was in the movie because they did get a job at the Church of Scientology, and I would run into them later, and we'll talk about that. Now, before we move on to the outro, before we end this episode, let's listen to the second rendition of Clip-On Tie that Murica prepared for me. Now, this one, the melody and the style for this one came from a different model upload, and it really took my prompt words seriously. I used the word rockabilly, and it really took it and ran. I mean, at the beginning, there's some Primus-type elements, and then it turns into Primus meets Randy Travis or something like that. Now, as we listen to this version, note that I wasn't as much of a fan of this version's approach to the lyrics, but I thought that the guitar solo in the middle of the song, in the bridge, just really crushed it, so I had to share it. So props to this virtual guitarist. They even gave the upright bass like 4 bars of a solo, which you don't hear very often. So let's take a listen to the next version of Clip-On Tie. Here we go.
Howdy, y'all! Yeah, welcome back to the bar. We talking sorority girls, how to keep them from harm. They're like prisons where the new girls cry at night. When the air gets dank and drums start to bite. I know I don't sound like much of a guard, but in Texas, that license test ain't too hard. But I gotta maintain, cause I'm the hero they need. The best guards stay awake, cause they're on speed. Ron's paying my rent, cause taxation is theft. Wear a clip-on tie so drums can't choke me to death. Stepping out tonight on the dusty concrete. I got 40 acres, but now I'm the mule. Looking for fame and fortune with no retreat. Dancing with danger on these Texas streets. I know I don't sound like much of a guard, but in Texas, that license test ain't too hard. But I gotta maintain, cause I'm a hero they need. The best guards stay away, cause they're on speed. Ron's paying my rent, cause taxation is theft. Wear a clip-on tie so drunks can't choke me to death.
Okay, well, that was interesting. I hope you enjoyed the instrumental part there. And I promise that Volume 3 will include a rap song that I rap on with my own actual voice. And I also promise that Volume 3 will start with my interview for Zimco. We'll get to meet Ron right off the bat. So that's coming in Volume 3. Along the way, before we close out the story of my time as a security guard, we're going to touch on a couple of other things that happened. We're going to check in on my last roommate at Jester, Jason, the guy who helped me get into bodybuilding and inspired me to look into security work. We're going to have to talk about my time with Texas Student Television, the student television station at UT that I did some camera work for. We'll have to talk about a band that I was briefly in. And at this point, I don't even want to mention the name because the name of the band is a source of extreme stress for me, and I can't handle talking about it more than a few minutes at a time. So I'll save all that emotional energy for then. Another thing I wanted to add is that had I been a male dancer, a spicy dancer, my stage name would have been Durango. And I know that for a fact because I actually had to come up with a stage name for my male nude dancing persona for an extremely elaborate prank phone call that I participated in multiple times. That's coming up in one of the final episodes. Unfortunately, I think Durango is a good name. Certainly a car manufacturer somewhere agrees with me. And so, until then, until next week, Volume 3, we'll continue the story of how I became the ultimate security guard and a hero to sorority girls across the world. It's going to be awesome. Probably the most compelling and dramatic and interesting story ever told by any human ever. So until then, talk to you later.